The bitter December wind cut through Abigail Foster's woolen shawl like it wasn't even there, stinging her face and numbing her fingers as she struggled with the heavy bundle of firewood. Her arms trembled with exhaustion, her back screaming in protest at the weight. 6 months since Papa's passing, and the harsh Wyoming winter of 1878 showed no mercy to a woman alone. Snowflakes began to drift down from the darkening sky, adding urgency to her task. The small homestead she now managed alone sat a quarter-mile ahead, but it might as well have been across the territory for how her strength was failing. A piece of wood slipped, then another, the carefully gathered bundle beginning to unravel. "Steady there, madam," came a deep voice behind her. Abigail startled, losing her grip entirely as the firewood scattered across the snow-dusted ground. She turned to find a tall stranger atop a chestnut mare. His face was partially hidden beneath the wide brim of his hat, but she could make out a strong jaw covered in several days' worth of beard. His sheepskin coat was weathered, as were the leather gloves gripping the reins. "I didn't mean to frighten you," he said, dismounting with easy grace despite his tall frame. "Allow me." Before she could protest, he began gathering the fallen wood, stacking it with efficient movements. Up close, she noticed eyes the color of a summer sky, startling against his sun-darkened skin. "I can manage," Abigail said, though her aching arms betrayed her words. He paused, those blue eyes assessing her with quiet intensity. "No doubt you can, madam. But my mother raised me better than to ride past a lady in need." His voice carried a slight drawl that suggested Texas origins. "You make a habit of appearing out of nowhere to assist strange women?" Abigail asked, immediately regretting her sharp tone. Months of solitude had dulled her social graces. To her surprise, a smile broke across his face, transforming his weather-beaten features. "Only the ones wrestling with firewood in snowstorms." He finished gathering the wood, bundling it securely. "Name's Levi Morgan, madam. Just passing through to Willow Creek." "Abigail Foster," she replied, gesturing toward the thin plume of smoke visible through the trees. "My homestead's just ahead." "Well, Miss Foster, I'd be obliged if you'd allow me to carry this the rest of the way." He hoisted the bundle with an ease that made her previous struggle seem foolish. Pride warred with practicality as the snow began falling faster. "Thank you, Mr. Morgan. That's kind of you." He nodded, leading his horse with one hand while balancing the firewood with the other. They walked in silence for several minutes, the only sounds the crunch of snow beneath their boots and the soft nickering of his mare. "You're managing this place alone?" he finally asked, his tone carefully neutral. Abigail stiffened. She'd grown weary of the pitying looks from townsfolk, the not-so-subtle suggestions that a woman couldn't handle a homestead without a husband. "My father passed this summer. We came west from Pennsylvania 4 years ago." She lifted her chin slightly. "The land is mine now." Levi nodded, offering no judgment. "Must be a challenge." "Life is full of those," she replied simply. As they approached the small cabin, Abigail felt a pang of self-consciousness. The place was modest at best, a one-room log structure with a lean-to addition her father had built for her privacy. The barn needed repairs, and half the fence around the chicken coop had collapsed under last month's early snow. "It's not much," she said before he could comment. "It's standing against Wyoming winters." "That's something to be proud of," Levi replied, surprising her again with his lack of condescension. Inside, the cabin was neat but sparse. A small fire sputtered in the stone hearth, barely warming the space. Levi deposited the firewood in the box beside it, removing his hat as he straightened. "Thank you," Abigail said, unwinding her scarf. "Can I offer you coffee? It's the least I can do." Something that might have been hesitation flickered across his face before he nodded. "That would be welcome, madam, if it's no trouble." Abigail busied herself with the coffee pot, suddenly aware of how long it had been since she'd entertained a visitor, especially one so tall and broad-shouldered that he seemed to make her modest home shrink around him. "Been in these parts long?" she asked, trying to recall the proper rhythm of conversation. "Just passing through," Levi answered, warming his hands by the fire. "Been working cattle drives between Texas and Montana for several years, taking some time now to figure things out." There was a story there, Abigail thought, but didn't press. Everyone out west carried their pasts like invisible luggage, some heavier than others. "And you, Miss Foster? 4 years is a fair stretch in frontier terms." Papa was determined to claim his own land. "Mother died before we left Pennsylvania, so it was just the two of us." She poured the coffee into 2 chipped cups. "He was a good man, stubborn as they come, but good." "Sounds like he raised a daughter in his image," Levi commented with that same transformative smile. Abigail found herself smiling back, the expression feeling strangely unfamiliar on her face. "I suppose he did at that." They sipped their coffee in surprisingly comfortable silence as the snow fell harder outside, the wind occasionally gusting against the shuttered windows. "I should see to your horse," Abigail said suddenly, remembering her duties as a host. "She shouldn't stand out in this weather." "I can tend to Penny," Levi began, but Abigail was already reaching for her coat. "I insist. I may be alone, but I haven't forgotten basic hospitality." Together they led the gentle mare to Abigail's small barn, where her own work horse and milk cow stood in their stalls. As they removed the saddle and brushed down the animal, Levi glanced around the space. "You've kept things in good order," he observed. "I try." Abigail forked fresh hay into the empty stall. "Though I fear the roof may not last another winter." Levi looked up, noting the places where daylight showed through the wooden beams. "I could take a look at that for you before I move on." Abigail turned to him, studying his face for signs of pity or ulterior motives. Finding none, she still hesitated. "I couldn't impose, it's no imposition," he interrupted gently. "Besides, this snow's coming down harder. I'd be grateful for shelter until it passes." The practical part of her knew he was right, and that refusing help out of pride was a luxury she couldn't afford. The cautious part reminded her that he was a stranger, a drifter. Yet something in those blue eyes spoke of honesty. "Very well, Mr. Morgan. You're welcome to the barn loft for the night." "Much obliged," he replied with a slight nod. "And it's just Levi if you don't mind." "Levi, then." His name felt strangely intimate on her lips. "I'll bring you some supper later." Back in the cabin, Abigail added wood to the fire, watching as the flames strengthened. The unexpected guest had disrupted her routine, but she found she didn't mind. The loneliness of the past months had worn on her more than she cared to admit. As she prepared a simple stew, Abigail caught herself wondering about the cowboy in her barn. He was handsome in a rugged way, certainly, but it was his quiet manner that intrigued her most. There was thoughtfulness in his eyes that suggested depths beneath the weathered exterior. When she carried a tray to the barn later, she found Levi had already begun examining the roof, moving loose boards to see the extent of the damage. "It's not as bad as it could be," he said by way of greeting. "Main supports are solid. It's just the covering that's worn through in places." "That's a relief," Abigail said, setting down the tray on a barrel. "I brought you some supper." He climbed down the ladder, dusting his hands on his trousers. "Thank you. It smells wonderful." "Just simple fare," she demurred, but felt pleased nonetheless. "Simple's often best." He sat on a hay bale and accepted the bowl. "My compliments to the cook." Abigail hesitated, then sat on another bale across from him. "May I ask where you're headed ultimately?" Levi took a thoughtful bite before answering. To be honest, I'm not entirely sure. My brother has a ranch starting up near Laramie. He's been asking me to join him. But you're not convinced. I've been on the move a long time, he shrugged. Not sure I remember how to stay in one place anymore. And your family, besides your brother, parents passed years back. It's just Luke and me now. He looked up from his bowl. What about you? No other family to help with this place? Abigail shook her head. No one close. An aunt back east, but we haven't spoken in years. She thought Papa was a fool for coming west. And what did you think? The question caught her off guard. Few had ever asked her opinion on the matter. I thought he was brave, she said slowly. Misguided sometimes, but brave. He wanted something that was truly his own, not handed down or borrowed. She gestured around the barn. This isn't much, but every log and nail was placed by our hands. There's pride in that. Levi's gaze held hers, surprisingly warm. Yes, there is. Something shifted in the air between them, a recognition perhaps. Two souls who understood the price of independence. I should let you rest, Abigail said, standing abruptly. The morning comes early, that it does. Levi rose as well, towering over her. Thank you for the meal, Abigail, and the shelter. The sound of her name in his deep voice sent an unexpected warmth through her chest. You're welcome. Levi. She hurried back to the cabin, confused by her reaction to this stranger. It had been so long since she'd had a real conversation with anyone, let alone a man who looked at her with such attentiveness. It was disarming and more than a little frightening. As she prepared for bed, Abigail tried to dismiss her foolish thoughts. He was passing through, nothing more. By this time tomorrow he'd be gone, and her life would return to its solitary rhythm. Yet as she drifted to sleep, the image of blue eyes and a rare smile followed her into dreams. Morning brought clear skies and brilliant sunshine that transformed the snowscape into a blinding white canvas. Abigail rose early as always, building up the fire and preparing breakfast before heading to the barn for morning chores. She found Levi already awake, feeding the animals with practiced ease. Good morning, he said, tipping his hat. Hope you don't mind. Seemed the least I could do for the hospitality. Not at all, Abigail replied, oddly touched by the gesture. Thank you. They worked together in companionable silence, their movements falling into a natural rhythm. Levi clearly knew his way around livestock, handling her ornery cow with patient firmness that even Abigail sometimes struggled to maintain. You mentioned repairs to the roof, she said as they finished the chores. I have some materials my father set aside, though I'm not sure if they're sufficient. Let's take a look, Levi suggested. They spent the morning assessing the damage and gathering supplies. Abigail was grateful for his knowledge, though she insisted on helping with the actual work, climbing the ladder alongside him to pass up boards and nails. Most women would be content to watch from below, Levi commented as she handed him a hammer. I'm not most women, Abigail replied matter-of-factly. Besides, how will I learn to do this myself if I don't participate? He gave her an appraising look. Fair point. Your father taught you well. He had no sons, she explained. So I learned everything he knew to teach hunting, building, even breaking horses when needed. Impressive. Necessary, she corrected, but couldn't help feeling pleased at his admiration. By midday, they had patched the worst sections of the roof. As they ate a simple lunch of bread and dried venison, Levi glanced toward the road. The snow's melted enough for travel, he observed, and Abigail felt an unexpected pang of disappointment. Yes, I suppose it has, she agreed, keeping her voice neutral. You'll be continuing to Willow Creek then? Levi seemed to hesitate. Actually, I was thinking I might stay another day or two if that's acceptable. There's that section of fence around your chicken coop that could use attention, and the north corner of the barn needs reinforcing before the next snow. Relief flooded through Abigail, followed immediately by caution. I couldn't ask you to delay your journey on my account. You didn't ask. I offered. His expression was open, sincere. I've got nowhere pressing to be, and it seems you could use an extra pair of hands. She wanted to refuse out of pride, but practicality won out. Very well, but I insist on compensating you for your work. Levi shook his head. Just meals and a place to sleep is payment enough. We'll discuss terms later, Abigail said firmly, unwilling to feel indebted. As the day progressed, they fell into an easy working relationship. Levi proved to be skilled with tools and patient with instruction when Abigail wanted to learn. By evening, the chicken coop fence stood straight and secure for the first time in months. Over supper in the cabin, their conversation flowed more freely. Levi shared stories of cattle drives and the characters he'd met along the trails. Abigail found herself laughing more than she had in years. So there I was, Levi continued, eyes crinkling with amusement, standing in the middle of the river with nothing but my hat, while this ornery bull had my trousers caught on his horn, running along the bank like he'd claimed a trophy. Abigail's laughter filled the small cabin. What did you do? Only thing I could do waited for that bull to lose interest, then snuck back to camp wrapped in my saddle blanket. He grinned at the memory. Never lived that one down with the boys. I can imagine not, Abigail said, wiping tears of mirth from her eyes. As their laughter subsided, a comfortable silence settled between them. The fire crackled in the hearth, casting warm light across Levi's features, softening the weathered lines around his eyes. It's good to hear you laugh, he said quietly. Abigail looked down at her hands. It's been a while since I had reason to. Your father's passing, she nodded. That and... She hesitated, then continued. The isolation, I suppose. Homesteading is lonely work for one person. That it is, Levi agreed. Is that why you've stayed? For your father's dream? The question hit close to her private doubts. Partly. And partly because I don't know what else I would do. This land is all I have. You strike me as a woman who could do anything she set her mind to, Abigail Foster. The conviction in his voice made her look up, meeting his gaze. Something passed between them, a current of understanding that made her breath catch. It's getting late, she said, breaking the moment. We should both get some rest. Levi nodded, rising from his chair. Thank you for supper and the company. You're welcome to sleep in the lean-to, Abigail offered impulsively. It's warmer than the barn, at least. I wouldn't want to impose. It's not an imposition. It was my father's room. The bedding is clean. After a moment's consideration, Levi accepted with a grateful nod. As she showed him to the small addition, Abigail was acutely aware of his presence, the way he ducked slightly to enter the low doorway, the scent of pine and leather that seemed to surround him. Sleep well, Levi, she said, retreating to her own side of the cabin. You too, Abigail. That night, knowing he was just on the other side of the wall, Abigail found sleep elusive. His presence had somehow made her home feel different, warmer, perhaps, more alive. It was a dangerous feeling, she knew. He wouldn't stay. Men like Levi Morgan didn't put down roots with struggling widows on half-failed homesteads. Yet as dawn broke, she found herself hoping he might linger just a little longer. The next few days established a routine that felt surprisingly natural. They worked side by side on various repairs around the homestead, breaking only for meals, and when the December sun dipped too low for continued labor. Levi proved himself handy with nearly everything, mending harnesses, reinforcing the barn's foundation, even helping butcher one of her chickens that had stopped laying. He taught Abigail tricks for splitting wood that conserved her strength, and she shared her knowledge of local plants and game trails. In the evenings, they would sit by the fire, sometimes talking late into the night, sometimes simply enjoying comfortable silence. Abigail found herself sharing stories she hadn't told anyone about her mother's death, her father's stubborn dreams, her own quiet ambitions to make the homestead truly thrive. Levi listened with genuine interest, offering his own tales in return adventures on the trail, the brother he both loved and found frustrating, the wanderlust that had kept him moving for nearly a decade. "Have you never wanted to settle?" Abigail asked one evening as they sat shelling the last of autumn's dried beans. Levi's hands paused in their work. "I thought about it a time or two. Even courted a girl back in San Antonio years ago. What happened? She married a shopkeeper while I was away on a drive." His voice held no bitterness, only acceptance. "Probably for the best. She wanted a man who'd be there every night, not one who disappeared for months at a time. And you couldn't give up the trail, not then." He resumed his shelling, eyes focused on his work. "I was young, restless. Thought there was always something more over the next horizon. And now?" Abigail asked softly. Levi looked up, his gaze finding hers across the table. "Now I'm starting to wonder if what I've been looking for might be found by staying in one place." The weight of his words hung between them, full of unspoken possibilities. Abigail's heart quickened, but fear held her tongue. She'd seen too many drifters pass through, making promises they never kept. "Your brother's ranch?" she finally asked. Something like disappointment flickered in Levi's eyes. "Perhaps, though I'm finding Wyoming has its own appeal." Before she could respond, a sharp gust of wind rattled the shutters, followed by the unmistakable sound of sleet hitting the roof. Outside, the evening had turned from clear to threatening in the span of their conversation. "Sounds like another storm moving in," Levi observed, moving to the window. Abigail joined him, their shoulders nearly touching as they peered out at the darkening landscape. Sure enough, sleet was giving way to heavy snow, driven by increasing winds. "It's coming on fast," she said with concern. "The animals, I'll check on them," Levi said, already reaching for his coat. "I'll come with you." Together they battled the intensifying storm to secure the livestock, making sure the barn doors were firmly latched and the chicken coop protected. By the time they returned to the cabin, they were both covered in snow, cheeks raw from the biting wind. "This is no ordinary squall," Levi said as they shed their outer layers. "Feels like a real blizzard brewing." Abigail nodded grimly. "We should prepare. These can last for days." They worked efficiently, bringing in extra firewood, checking water supplies, and securing the shutters against the howling wind. As night deepened, the storm's fury increased, snow piling against the north side of the cabin while wind screamed through the eaves. "I've seen my share of bad weather," Levi remarked as they finally settled by the fire, "but Wyoming winters are something else entirely." "Papa used to say that Wyoming doesn't have weather, it has sieges," Abigail replied, warming her hands around a cup of tea. Levi chuckled. "Smart man." The wind gave a particularly violent gust, causing the whole cabin to shudder. Abigail couldn't help the small gasp that escaped her lips as the lights flickered from the draft. "Hey," Levi said gently, moving to sit beside her on the small sofa. "This place has weathered worse, I'd wager. Your father built it solid." "I know," she said, embarrassed by her momentary fear. "It's just the first big storm since he's been gone. I used to find it comforting, knowing he was here if anything went wrong." Without hesitation, Levi placed his hand over hers. "You're not alone tonight, Abigail." The simple touch and quiet assurance broke something inside her, a dam of grief and loneliness she'd been holding back for months. To her horror, tears spilled down her cheeks. "I'm sorry," she whispered, trying to turn away. "Don't be," Levi said, his voice low and steady. His arm came around her shoulders, offering support without demand. Sometimes the strongest people are the ones who allow themselves moments of weakness. Abigail leaned into his embrace, allowing herself the comfort of human contact after so many months of solitude. His heartbeat was strong beneath her ear, his hand warm against her shoulder. "Thank you," she murmured when the tears finally subsided, "for being here, for everything." "There's nowhere I'd rather be right now," Levi answered, and the sincerity in his voice made her look up. Their faces were close, his eyes reflecting the firelight. For a breathless moment, Abigail thought he might kiss her, and more surprising still, she realized she wanted him to. Instead, he gently tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, his fingers lingering against her cheek. "We should get some rest. Morning will come early, storm or no." Abigail nodded, both relieved and disappointed as he withdrew his arm. "Good night, Levi." "Good night, Abigail." As she lay in bed listening to the storm rage outside, Abigail's thoughts were a tumult to match the weather. She was falling for him, this kind, capable drifter who'd appeared from nowhere like an answer to prayers she hadn't known she was making. But he would leave. Men like Levi always did. She closed her eyes, telling herself that friendship was enough more than she'd had in months. She wouldn't ask for more, wouldn't set herself up for heartbreak. Yet in the darkness, her traitor heart whispered other wishes entirely. The blizzard raged for 3 days, transforming the world outside into an alien landscape of towering drifts and wind-sculpted snow. Inside the cabin, Abigail and Levi settled into a routine of necessary tasks, tending the fire, melting snow for water when their stored supply ran low, making daily treks to the barn to care for the animals. The forced proximity should have been awkward, but instead it fostered a deepening ease between them. They shared stories, played cards, and even sang songs from their childhoods to pass the long evening hours. Levi proved to have a surprisingly pleasant baritone that complemented Abigail's clear soprano. "My mother insisted we all learn hymns," he explained after they finished a rendition of Amazing Grace that had filled the small cabin with harmony. "Said music was God's way of making sure we remembered beauty existed even in hard times." "She sounds wise," Abigail said, watching the firelight play across his features. "She was. Tough as rawhide but gentle when it mattered." Levi smiled at some private memory. "Would have liked you, I think." She admired people who faced life head-on. The casual compliment warmed Abigail more than the fire. "And your father, a cattleman through and through, taught us everything about handling stock, reading weather, surviving in rough country." His smile turned wry. "Less successful at teaching us to stay put." "Hence the wandering," Abigail observed. "Hence the wandering," he agreed. "Though lately I've been thinking he might have had the right idea after all. There's something to be said for building something lasting." Their eyes met, and that now familiar current passed between them. Each day seemed to bring more such moments, lingering glances, the brush of hands when passing items, conversations that edged toward deeper waters before one or the other pulled back. On the morning of the 4th day, they awoke to silence. The wind had died completely, leaving an eerie stillness in its wake. When Levi opened the door, they were greeted by a world transformed pristine white stretching in every direction, tree branches heavy with snow, and a sky so brilliantly blue it almost hurt to look at it. "Never gets old," Levi murmured, taking in the view. "No, it doesn't," Abigail agreed, standing beside him in the doorway. Together they dug paths to the necessary buildings, checking for damage from the storm. Beyond some minor drifting into the barn and a few loosened boards, the homestead had weathered the blizzard well. The road will be impassable for days yet, Abigail noted as they surveyed the property. At least, Levi agreed. You don't sound too concerned. We have adequate supplies, she said practically, though her heart leapt at the implicit extension of his stay. And I've learned to be self-sufficient. That you have. He glanced at her with respect. Still, I'm glad I was here. That was a mighty storm to face alone. As am I, Abigail admitted softly. That afternoon, as the sun began its early winter descent, they took advantage of the clear weather to check Abigail's trap lines. Game would be scarce after such a storm, and fresh meat would be welcome. Strapping on snowshoes, they ventured into the woods behind the homestead. The going was challenging but beautiful, the forest transformed into a glittering wonderland of snow-laden branches and untouched drifts. Your father taught you trapping too? Levi asked as Abigail expertly reset a snare. He did. Said a person should never rely on just one skill to survive. She straightened, brushing snow from her gloves. The first winter was lean. These traps meant the difference between eating and starving some weeks. Levi nodded in understanding. The frontier was unforgiving to those who came unprepared. They checked 5 more traps, finding 2 rabbits that Levi dispatched quickly and humanely. As they turned back toward the homestead, the sound of cracking ice ahead made them pause. The creek should be frozen solid this time of year, Abigail said with a frown. Unless the storm changed its course, Levi replied, his expression turning serious. Stay here. Let me check. Before she could protest, he moved forward carefully, testing each step. 20 yards ahead he stopped, surveying the ground. The snow's covering it, but the creek's overflowed its banks, he called back. We need to find another way around. Abigail moved to join him, mindful of her footing. There's a crossing further north, her words cut off as the snow beneath her suddenly gave way. One moment she was standing. The next, she was plunging through hidden ice into frigid water. The shock stole her breath and numbed her limbs instantly. The current, stronger than she'd anticipated, pulled at her heavy winter clothing, dragging her under. Through the crystalline water, sunlight filtered in distorted beams as she struggled to find the surface. Then strong hands were gripping her coat, hauling her upward. She broke the surface with a desperate gasp, coughing and sputtering as Levi dragged her toward solid ground. Hold on, he urged, his voice tight with urgency. Just hold on. Abigail tried to help, but her limbs wouldn't cooperate, clumsy and leaden from the cold. Levi lifted her bodily from the water, carrying her to the shore and immediately stripping off his coat to wrap around her. We need to get you warm, he said, his face grim as he assessed her condition. Can you walk? I think so, Abigail managed through chattering teeth. Levi helped her stand, but her legs buckled immediately. Without hesitation, he scooped her into his arms. Hang on to me, he instructed, adjusting her weight. We need to move fast. The journey back to the cabin passed in a blur of cold and increasing numbness. Abigail was vaguely aware of Levi's labored breathing as he carried her through the deep snow, his steady heartbeat against her ear, his voice occasionally murmuring encouragement. By the time they reached the cabin, she was shivering violently, her wet clothes beginning to freeze. Levi kicked the door open and carried her straight to the fire, which thankfully still burned from that morning. We need to get these wet things off you, he said, his tone professional despite the intimacy of the statement. Can you manage or do you need help? Help, Abigail admitted, her fingers too numb to work buttons. With efficient movements tempered by gentlemanly restraint, Levi helped her out of her frozen outer layers, keeping his eyes averted as much as possible. He wrapped her in a quilt from her bed, then quickly built up the fire to a roaring blaze. I'll make some hot tea, he said, moving to the stove. And heat some water for a proper warming bath." Abigail huddled by the fire, the violent shivering gradually subsiding as warmth began to penetrate her frozen limbs. She watched Levi move about her kitchen with the same capability he'd shown in everything else, his concern evident in the set of his shoulders. "Thank you," she said when he brought her the tea, "if you hadn't been there." "But I was," he interrupted firmly, kneeling beside her, "and you're going to be fine." His hand touched her cheek briefly, checking her temperature. The simple contact sent warmth through her that had nothing to do with the fire. "Your color's coming back," he observed with relief. "I feel foolish," Abigail admitted. "I know better than to trust snow-covered ground near water. We all make mistakes. The important thing is you're safe." His blue eyes held hers, intense with an emotion she couldn't quite name. "I don't know what I would have done if—" he stopped, looking away. "Levi." When he looked back, the naked vulnerability in his expression took her breath away. "I care about you, Abigail. More than I should, perhaps, given how short a time we've known each other." Her heart seemed to stop, then race forward. "I care about you too," she whispered. For a long moment they simply looked at each other, the admission hanging in the air between them. Then Levi stood, clearing his throat. "You should change into something dry. I'll wait outside." "No," Abigail said quickly. "Just turn around. It's too cold out there." He nodded, turning to face the wall while she slipped into dry clothing, moving as quickly as her still clumsy fingers would allow. "Decent now," she said when she'd finished. Levi turned back, relief evident in his face as he took in her improved appearance. "You should rest. That kind of cold takes a toll." "Will you sit with me?" Abigail asked, suddenly unwilling to let him out of her sight. "Of course." They settled on the small sofa, Abigail still wrapped in the quilt. After a moment's hesitation, Levi put his arm around her, and she leaned into his warmth gratefully. "When I saw you go through that ice," he said quietly, "I've never been so scared in my life." Abigail looked up at him, struck by the raw honesty in his voice. "I wasn't afraid," she admitted. "Not once I knew you were there." Something shifted in Levi's expression, his eyes darkening as they dropped to her lips. This time there was no hesitation. He leaned down slowly, giving her every chance to pull away. Instead, Abigail closed the distance between them. His lips were warm against hers, the kiss gentle at first, then deepening as she responded. His hand came up to cradle her face, fingers tangling in her still damp hair. Abigail felt herself melting into him, every lonely month fading away beneath the sweetness of his touch. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Levi rested his forehead against hers. "I've been wanting to do that since the moment I saw you struggling with that firewood," he confessed. "That long?" Abigail asked, surprised. "That long," he confirmed with a smile. "Though I'll admit it wasn't very gentlemanly of me, considering we'd just met." "I'm glad you waited then," she teased. "I might have thought you forward." His laugh rumbled through his chest, vibrating against her. "We can't have that." Abigail sobered, reality intruding on the moment. "You're still leaving, though, when the road's clear." Levi pulled back slightly to look at her properly. "Is that what you want?" "It's what happens," she replied, unable to keep the hint of resignation from her voice. "Men like you don't stay. Men like me, drifters, cowboys, men with wanderlust in their blood." Levi considered this, his thumb tracing gentle circles on her shoulder. "Maybe," he said slowly, "some men just haven't found the right reason to stay put." Hope flickered in Abigail's chest, but she tamped it down. "And have you found a reason?" His eyes held hers steadily. "I'm beginning to think I have." The simple statement contained worlds of possibility. Abigail hardly dared believe it, yet couldn't stop the smile that spread across her face. "Is that so, Mr. Morgan?" "Indeed it is, Miss Foster." He leaned in for another kiss, this one brief but tender. Though I should warn you, if I stay, I'll be courting you properly, with all the traditional nuisances that entails." Abigail laughed, happiness bubbling up like a spring. "I believe I could tolerate such nuisances." As evening deepened around them, they remained close, talking softly of possibilities and plans, of hopes long dormant now cautiously reawakening. Outside, the frozen landscape glittered beneath a rising moon, the storm's fury replaced by a peaceful stillness that matched the contentment growing in Abigail's heart. For the first time since her father's death, the future looked not just bearable, but bright. The days following Abigail's accident brought changes both subtle and profound to the small homestead. With the acknowledgement of their feelings came a new ease between them. Touches that lingered, smiles exchanged across the room, conversations that stretched deep into the night as they shared hopes and dreams long kept private. True to his word, Levi began a proper courtship, though the isolated circumstances made it unconventional by necessity. He carved her a delicate wooden comb, fashioning it from a piece of pine with patient skill, while she mended clothing in the evenings. He read aloud from her small collection of books, his deep voice bringing the stories to life in the firelit cabin. For her part, Abigail found herself singing more, cooking special meals from carefully hoarded ingredients, and allowing herself to imagine a future not defined by solitary struggle. A week after the blizzard, the sun's growing strength began to melt the snow, creating treacherous patches of ice by day that refroze each night. They ventured to the barn together one morning to discover Levi's mare favoring her right foreleg. "Looks like a strained tendon," Levi said after careful examination. "Nothing serious, but she'll need rest." "No riding for a while then," Abigail observed, stroking the horse's velvety nose. "No riding," Levi agreed, his eyes meeting hers over the animal's back. "I suppose I'm truly stranded now." The smile they shared held no regret, only quiet happiness at the extended time together. As they walked back to the cabin hand in hand, Abigail found herself thinking how natural his presence had become, as if he'd always been a part of her world. "What are you thinking?" Levi asked, noticing her thoughtful expression. "That I never expected this," she admitted. "You, any of it, regrets?" His tone was light, but she caught the hint of vulnerability beneath. "None," Abigail assured him, squeezing his hand. "Though I do wonder what the townspeople will say when they discover I've been snowed in with a strange cowboy all this time." Levi laughed. "I imagine they'll have plenty to say. Small towns usually do. Mrs. Hawkins from the general store will be scandalized," Abigail predicted with a grin. "She already thinks I'm improper for wearing trousers while doing farm work." "Shocking behavior," Levi agreed solemnly, though his eyes danced with amusement. "Almost as shocking as this." He pulled her into his arms for a kiss that left her breathless, their mingled laughter forming clouds in the cold air. Later that day, as they worked together to repair a broken wheel on her cart, Levi broached a subject they'd been circling. "I've been thinking about your homestead," he began carefully. "Oh," Abigail paused in her work, watching him. "It has good bones, this place. Good water, decent soil from what I can tell. The barn's solid despite needing some work." He adjusted a spoke, not meeting her eyes. "With the right attention, it could be a fine small ranch. Maybe start with a few head of cattle in the spring, build up slowly." Abigail's heart quickened. "That would take considerable work and investment." "Yes," Levi agreed. "It would. And expertise in cattle," she added. Now he looked up, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "That it would." They held each other's gaze, the implications clear between them. "Are you offering to help me turn this place into a ranch, Levi Morgan?" Abigail asked finally, her voice steady despite her racing pulse. "I'm offering more than that, Abigail Foster." He set down his tools, taking her hands in his. "I'm offering to build a life here with you if you'll have me." Though she'd begun to hope for exactly this, the reality of his proposal still took her breath away. "You're certain? This isn't just gratitude for a warm place during a storm." Levi's laugh was warm with affection. "Darlin', if all I wanted was shelter, there are far easier paths than falling in love with a stubborn, independent woman who insists on learning to fix her own roof." Falling in love. Abigail echoed, her heart soaring at the words. "Yes, Abigail." His voice softened, his hands tightening around hers. "I love you. I know it's fast, perhaps too fast by proper standards, but I've never been more certain of anything." Tears pricked at Abigail's eyes, but they were tears of joy. "I love you too," she whispered. "And I don't care about proper standards, not anymore." Levi pulled her close, his kiss sealing the promise between them. When they parted, both were smiling like fools. "Does this mean you accept my proposal?" he asked, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "You haven't actually proposed anything specific," Abigail pointed out, though she couldn't stop smiling. Levi's expression turned serious. He knelt before her in the snow, still holding her hands. "Abigail Foster, will you marry me? Be my wife, my partner in building something lasting on this land you love so much?" "Yes," she answered without hesitation. "Yes, I will." He rose, lifting her off her feet in an exuberant embrace that spun them both around, their laughter echoing across the snow-covered yard. As January gave way to February, they settled into planning their future. Levi wrote to his brother in Laramie, explaining his change in plans and inquiring about purchasing a small herd of cattle come spring. Abigail took inventory of seeds and supplies, calculating what they would need to expand the garden and repair the remaining weak spots around the property. In the evenings, they would sit by the fire, heads bent together over rough sketches of what the homestead might become, a proper ranch house to replace the small cabin eventually, expanded pasture land for the cattle, perhaps even an orchard of hardy apple trees on the south slope. "We'll need to visit town once the road's clear," Abigail said one night as they finished outlining their spring planting strategy. "For supplies and to see about making things official." Levi nodded, understanding her meaning. "The preacher comes through Willow Creek monthly, as I recall. We could be married by March if the weather cooperates." "March," Abigail repeated, the word filling her with anticipation. "That seems both too far away and too soon." "Too far to wait, too soon to prepare," Levi guessed with a smile. "Exactly." She leaned against his shoulder. "Though in truth, I feel as if we're already bound in all the ways that matter." "We are," Levi agreed, his arm tightening around her. "The ceremony will just make it known to everyone else." The intimacy between them had deepened with each passing day, though both had agreed to wait for their wedding night for the final expression of their love. The anticipation created a sweet tension, making even simple touches charged with meaning. As February progressed, the weather grew milder, snow melting to reveal patches of dormant grass beneath. One afternoon, the distant sound of hoofbeats brought them both outside, shading their eyes against the strengthening sun. A rider approached along the road, the first visitor since Levi's arrival nearly 2 months before. As the figure drew closer, Abigail recognized Jacob Turner, their nearest neighbor from 3 miles east. "Miss Foster," he called, reining in his horse. "Glad to see you weathered the storms." His gaze shifted to Levi, curiosity evident. "Didn't know you had company." "Mr. Turner, this is Levi Morgan," Abigail introduced, conscious of the man's assessing look. "He's been helping with repairs since the December blizzard." Levi stepped forward, offering his hand. "Pleasure to meet you, Mr. Turner." The older man shook hands, his weathered face thoughtful. Morgan, you say? Any relation to Luke Morgan who's setting up near Laramie, my brother, Levi confirmed, surprised. You know him. Met him at a livestock auction last fall. Seemed a decent sort. Turner turned back to Abigail. Just riding through to check on folks after that last big snow. Town's getting back to normal. Thought you might want to know the roads are passable now if you need supplies. Thank you, Abigail said. We were planning to visit town soon ourselves. Turner's gaze moved between them, noting their easy proximity to each other. His expression remained neutral, but Abigail could practically see the conclusions forming in his mind. Well, he said after a moment, I'd best continue on. Hopkins' family over the ridge has a new baby I should check on. Give them our congratulations, Abigail said. As Turner rode away, Levi chuckled softly. And so it begins. What's that? Abigail asked. The news that Abigail Foster has a man living on her property. He grinned. I'd wager that by sundown half the county will know. Abigail groaned, though she couldn't help smiling. You're probably right. We should make that trip to town sooner rather than later, before the rumors get too outlandish. 2 days later, they set out for Willow Creek, Levi riding Abigail's workhorse while she drove the small cart. The journey took most of the morning, the road still muddy from melting snow. As they approached the town, Abigail felt a flutter of nervousness. She rarely visited except for absolute necessities, and never with a gentleman companion. Willow Creek was modest by any standard, a single main street lined with basic establishments. General store, blacksmith, small hotel, church, and the inevitable saloon. As they tied up their animals in front of the general store, Abigail was acutely aware of curious glances from passers-by. Ready? Levi asked quietly, offering his arm. Abigail took a deep breath and placed her hand in the crook of his elbow. Ready. Inside the store, Mrs. Hawkins was helping a customer but paused mid-sentence when she saw them enter together. Her eyes widened almost comically before she recovered her professional demeanor. Miss Foster, she greeted, her voice pitched to Carrie. We haven't seen you in town for some time. I trust you weathered the winter storm safely. Yes, thank you, Mrs. Hawkins, Abigail replied with practiced politeness. Fortunately, Mr. Morgan was kind enough to assist with some necessary repairs to my property. Mrs. Hawkins's gaze shifted to Levi, openly curious. How fortunate indeed. I don't believe we've met, Mr. Morgan. Madam, Levi tipped his hat respectfully. Just passing through when the storms hit, Miss Foster was kind enough to offer shelter. The older woman's eyebrows rose slightly at this, but she simply nodded. Well, what can I help you with today? As they went through their list of supplies, Abigail could feel the weight of scrutiny not just from Mrs. Hawkins, but from the other customers who had suddenly found reasons to linger. By the time they finished their transaction, the air was thick with unasked questions. Levi, seemingly unfazed by the attention, maintained a courteous manner throughout, his hand occasionally touching the small of Abigail's back in a gesture that was both supportive and quietly possessive. Their next stop was the small church at the end of the street, where they hoped to find information about the preacher's next visit. The building was empty save for an elderly man sweeping the floor, who introduced himself as Deacon Williams. Reverend Parker comes through on the 3rd Sunday of each month, he informed them after hearing their inquiry. That would be just over 2 weeks from now. Thank you, Levi said. We'd like to arrange to be married during his visit if possible. The deacon's bushy eyebrows shot up, but he recovered quickly. Of course, I'll make note of it. Names, Levi Morgan and Abigail Foster. As the deacon wrote in a small ledger, he cleared his throat. Forgive me for asking, but how long have you two been acquainted? Abigail felt a blush rising in her cheeks, but Levi answered smoothly. We met in December. I understand it seems hasty by conventional standards, but when you know something's right, why wait? The older man studied them for a moment, then nodded slowly. My Eliza and I married after knowing each other 6 weeks. Been together 42 years now. A smile crinkled his weathered face. Sometimes the heart knows quicker than society thinks proper. Relief washed through Abigail at this unexpected support. Thank you for understanding. Just be here by noon on the third Sunday, the deacon said, closing his ledger. And bring 2 witnesses. As they left the church, Abigail felt lighter despite the curious stares that followed them down the street. That went better than I expected, she admitted. People will talk, Levi said, taking her hand. But they'll talk regardless of what we do. Better to be honest and direct. Their final stop was the small land office, where they inquired about adding Levi's name to the homestead deed after their marriage. The balding clerk seemed more interested in his paperwork than in passing judgment, explaining the process in a bored monotone before returning to his ledgers. By the time they finished their errands and loaded their supplies, most of the town seemed aware of their situation. Abigail overheard whispers as they passed the hotel and noted how conversations paused when they entered the feed store. "Are you all right?" Levi asked as they prepared for the journey home. Abigail considered the question. A few months ago, being the subject of such speculation would have mortified her. Now, with Levi beside her, it seemed a small price to pay for the happiness she'd found. "Yes," she said with genuine serenity. "Let them talk. We know the truth of what we've built." Levi's smile was worth every whisper and stare. "That we do." The journey home was peaceful, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the landscape as they discussed their wedding plans. It would be simple by necessity, just close neighbors as witnesses, perhaps a small celebration afterward. "I wish your brother could attend," Abigail said as they crested the final hill before her property came into view. "He'll visit when the weather's more settled," Levi assured her. "And we'll have many years to celebrate with family as we build it." The casual reference to their future children sent a warm glow through Abigail's heart. The homestead spread out before them, modest but full of potential, just like the life they were choosing together. As February gave way to March, the land began its slow awakening from winter's grip. Green shoots appeared in sheltered areas, and the days lengthened noticeably. Levi and Abigail worked from dawn to dusk preparing for spring planting and the eventual arrival of cattle. Word came from Levi's brother that he could spare 10 head of quality stock, including a promising young bull, as a wedding present. The news cemented their plans and filled Abigail with growing excitement for their future. The day before their wedding dawned clear and surprisingly warm for mid-March. They spent the morning completing chores, then separated to prepare for the following day. Tradition dictated they shouldn't see each other the night before the ceremony, so Levi would stay with Jacob Turner, who had volunteered both as host and witness. As evening approached, Levi packed a small bag with his best shirt and the new tie they'd purchased in town. Standing in the doorway of the cabin, he seemed reluctant to leave. "It's only for one night," Abigail reminded him with a smile, though she felt the same hesitation. "The longest night of my life, I expect," Levi replied, drawing her into his arms, "but worth it for all the nights after." His kiss was tender yet promising, a preview of the intimacy they would soon share as husband and wife. When they finally parted, both were breathless. "Until tomorrow, Miss Foster," Levi said, his voice husky. "Until tomorrow, Mr. Morgan," Abigail replied, her heart full to bursting. She watched him ride away, already counting the hours until they would meet again, this time before God and their neighbors, to bind their lives together. The night passed slowly, sleep elusive as Abigail alternated between excited anticipation and quiet reflection on the remarkable turn her life had taken. From the depths of lonely grief to the threshold of a joyful partnership in just a few short months. Morning brought perfect weather, sunny skies with a gentle breeze that carried the promise of spring. Abigail bathed carefully, then donned the simple but elegant blue dress she'd altered for the occasion. It had been her mother's, carefully preserved all these years, and wearing it felt like carrying a piece of her family's blessing with her. Sarah Turner, Jacob's wife, arrived mid-morning to help with final preparations and to accompany Abigail to town. Her friendly chatter helped calm Abigail's growing nerves as the hour approached. "You look beautiful," Sarah assured her as they prepared to leave. "And if I may say so, that man of yours can't take his eyes off you whenever you're in the same room. It's plain as day he adores you." "Thank you," Abigail said, touched by the woman's kindness, "for everything." The small church was already half full when they arrived, not just with the invited witnesses but with curious townsfolk who had heard about the hasty wedding. Abigail might have been intimidated by their presence once, but today she barely noticed them. For there at the front of the church stood Levi, tall and handsome in his best clothes, his eyes finding hers the moment she entered. The love shining in his face banished every doubt, every whisper, every hardship that had led to this moment. Reverend Parker, a kind-faced man in his 50s, smiled as Abigail walked toward them. The ceremony was simple but heartfelt, the traditional vows taking on profound meaning as they pledged their lives to one another. "I, Levi, take you, Abigail, to be my wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death do us part." His voice was steady, his eyes never leaving hers as he spoke the sacred words. When Abigail repeated her own vows, she felt as though they were alone in the church, connected by a bond that transcended the simple ceremony. "By the authority vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife," Reverend Parker concluded with a warm smile. "You may kiss your bride." Levi's kiss was gentle but full of promise, his hands cradling her face as if she were the most precious thing in the world. When they turned to face the congregation as Mr. and Mrs. Morgan, Abigail was surprised to see genuine warmth in many of the faces. Perhaps the romance of their whirlwind courtship had softened even the most skeptical hearts. A small reception followed at the hotel dining room, where Jacob Turner surprised them with a cake his wife had baked for the occasion. Even Mrs. Hawkins approached with congratulations and a small gift of preserves from her private stock. "Every home needs sweetness," she said with unexpected gentleness, "especially at the beginning." By late afternoon, they were heading home, their home now, truly shared. The future stretched before them, full of promise and possibilities neither had dared imagine just months before. That evening, as twilight painted the sky in shades of purple and gold, Levi carried Abigail across the threshold of the cabin, both laughing at the old tradition. Inside, they had transformed the simple space with fresh candles and the finest linens Abigail possessed. "Welcome home, Mrs. Morgan," Levi said softly, setting her on her feet but keeping his arms around her. "I like the sound of that," Abigail replied, her heart overflowing with happiness. Their first night as husband and wife was everything Abigail had dreamed and more tender, passionate, and deeply connecting. In Levi's arms, she found a completion she hadn't known was possible, their bodies expressing what words could only hint at. After, as they lay entwined beneath the quilts, Levi traced gentle patterns on her bare shoulder. "Happy?" he asked. Abigail raised her head to look at him, this man who had appeared in her life like an answer to unspoken prayers. "More than I ever thought possible," she answered truthfully. "Good," he said, pressing a kiss to her forehead, "because this is just the beginning." Spring arrived in earnest the following week, the land transforming with remarkable speed. Tender green grass emerged in the pastures, trees budded, and wildflowers dotted the hillsides with splashes of color. It was as if nature itself celebrated their new beginning. True to his word, Luke Morgan arrived in early April with the promised cattle, 10 sturdy animals that would form the foundation of their growing ranch. He stayed for a week, helping establish the herd while getting to know his new sister-in-law. "I've never seen my brother so settled," Luke commented to Abigail as they watched Levi repairing a section of fence, "or so happy." "I hope I'm the cause of at least some of that happiness," she replied with a smile. "All of it, I'd wager." Luke's expression turned serious. "Our father always said Levi had too much wanderlust for his own good. I thought he'd never find his place in the world." He gestured toward the homestead, the budding orchard they'd planted, the cattle grazing peacefully. "Turns out his place wasn't a where, but a who." The observation stayed with Abigail long after Luke departed, filling her with quiet joy. They worked side by side through the spring planting, the cattle births, the expansion of the chicken coop to accommodate more laying hens. Each day brought new challenges, but facing them together made even the hardest tasks manageable. By midsummer, the changes to the homestead were remarkable. The vegetable garden flourished, providing abundant fresh food. The cattle grew sleek on the rich grass, promising a good return when it came time to sell the steers. The repairs Levi had begun during the winter were completed, with improvements added: a larger rainwater cistern, expanded barn stalls, even the beginnings of a proper ranch house they hoped to complete before winter. In July, as they celebrated their 4-month anniversary with a picnic beside the creek that had nearly claimed Abigail's life, she shared news that brought tears of joy to Levi's eyes. "A baby," he repeated, his voice filled with wonder as he placed a gentle hand on her still flat stomach. "You're certain as one can be," Abigail confirmed, covering his hand with her own. "Dr. Wilson confirmed it yesterday when I was in town. We should expect our child around February." "February," Levi marveled. "A year after we decided to build a life together." "It seems fitting, doesn't it?" Abigail leaned against him, contentment washing through her. "A new life to celebrate our beginning." Levi gathered her close, his kiss conveying everything words couldn't: gratitude, joy, love beyond measure. When he finally pulled back, his eyes shone with emotion. "When I stopped to help you with that firewood, I never imagined where it would lead," he said softly. "I was just a drifter with no particular destination. And I was just a stubborn woman determined to manage alone," Abigail replied with a smile. "How fortunate we both were wrong." As summer deepened into autumn, their preparations took on new urgency, not just for the coming winter, but for the child who would join them. Levi worked tirelessly on the new house, determined to have at least the main room and bedroom completed before the baby's arrival. Neighbors who had initially been skeptical of their hasty marriage now stopped by regularly, offering help with harvesting or barn raising, bringing hand-sewn baby clothes and practical advice for the expecting parents. The community that had once felt distant to Abigail now embraced them as valued members. By December, as the first snow dusted the expanded homestead, the transformation was complete. What had been a struggling widow's modest holding was now a thriving small ranch, with healthy livestock, well-maintained buildings, and a partially completed new home that promised room for their growing family. On the anniversary of their first meeting, Levi surprised Abigail by recreating the moment, deliberately finding her as she carried a small bundle of firewood from the woodpile. "Steady there, madam," he called, approaching with a grin. "Allow me to assist with that burden." Abigail laughed as he took the wood, her expanded figure making such tasks increasingly challenging. "You're incorrigible, Levi Morgan." "Perhaps," he agreed, setting down the wood to take her in his arms. "But you love me anyway." "I do," she confirmed, rising on tiptoes to kiss him. More each day. That evening, as they sat before the fire in their new home's main room, the first room completed in the expanded house, Abigail felt a profound sense of gratitude. The past year had brought changes she could never have imagined when struggling alone with her grief and burdens. "What are you thinking?" Levi asked, noticing her thoughtful expression as he placed a protective hand on her rounded belly. "That sometimes the things that seem like accidents, meeting a stranger during a wood gathering, being snowed in together, even falling through ice, turn out to be the greatest blessings." She covered his hand with her own, feeling their child move beneath their joined touch. "That sometimes the heaviest burdens lead to the most unexpected joys." Levi's eyes, still that same striking blue that had first caught her attention, softened with understanding. "And sometimes," he added, "when a man stops to help a woman with her firewood, he finds not just her burden but his own heart being shared." Outside, snow began to fall gently, reminiscent of that first day. But inside their home, built with love, strengthened through partnership, and filled with promise for the future, all was warmth and light and boundless possibility. And in February, when their daughter arrived during a gentle snowfall, they named her Hope, a testament to the unexpected journey that had brought them together, and the bright future that stretched before their family, as vast and promising as the Wyoming sky above their thriving ranch. Throughout the years that followed, Abigail and Levi would often tell their children the story of how they met, of firewood and blizzards, of ice and rescue, of two souls finding each other against all odds. And always, the tale would end the same way, with gratitude for the burdens that had brought them together and the love that had made those burdens lighter for them both.